but using far more open standards. This is not just sharing data, this is sharing services. You can share a web service, you can share any number of things. The data itself can be published there, but more importantly, I think services will be shared, and this will be a hub where people can come and find shared services. I want to talk for a few minutes about web editing. A few months ago, I was at a conference in Atlantic Canada where Michael Goodchild spoke. That was the conference that he talked about the boiling the cup of water. And he had two things that he talked about that I thought were very, very interesting. Number one was the role of the public in producing volunteered geographic information or user-generated content or user-contributed content, where citizens actually come together and describe the world's geography. I think this phenomenon is amazing, utterly amazing. Some of the statistics he mentioned were remarkable. Wikimapia has been up for 3 years, has 10.5 million entries. That's 2 times the world's largest gazetteer. There are 7 individuals who have contributed more than 100,000 entries each to Wikimapia. One on 100,000 entries on the Antarctic alone. They estimate that Michael and his team estimated it would have taken that person 50 hours a week for 3 years to do it, and they were volunteering it. So there are these prosumers out there, if you will, who are very, very interested in contributing data. So that's the one end of the spectrum where it's asserted geographic information as opposed to authoritative geographic information. There's a couple other examples that I want to talk about here. Address BC, right here in British Columbia, and the Nova Scotia Civic address file that I'll talk about in a minute, that are taking an approach where they're actually capturing, using the Geoweb to bring addresses together. And the question becomes, is this the future of geoconnections? Is geoconnections, and this is a big discussion. I'm on the Geoconnections Management Board and on the Policy Committee, and we're having a lot of discussions right now about what is the future of geoconnections. What is its purpose? Is it to organize a top-down hierarchy of authoritative data and publish that? Or is it to help organize the bottom-up crowdsourced data? And I think it's a combination of both and something in between, which I'll cover here in a minute. So what is Address BC? Well, this is an interesting project for me because other than the Nova Scotia Civic Address file, these are the only 2 projects I know of in Canada that are harnessing hundreds of organizations, different organizations, to come up with an authoritative record of addresses in BC. There are 180 different organizations in British Columbia that belong to ISIS, the Integrated Cadastral Information Society. And ISIS was originally created to pull together a cadastral fabric for the province, but it also is a repository for utility information, common utility information, and now addresses. So what was the business need they identified? Well, number one, they needed addressing on their cadastral parcels. More importantly, all of the utilities that are part of ISIS, it's funded major part by utilities, TELUS, Terrace and Gas, BC Hydro, a number of others, need accurate addresses for services. And GeoBC is building a site registry of all different government sites across the province, healthcare providers, and they needed accurate addresses for this as well. Why choose addresses to start organizing? Addresses are the place where first responders go. When you call 911, they look at the address, and they have a map that says where to go from that address. So it's literally a life-critical application. And we hear all the time in the news about somebody died because the ambulance couldn't get there because the address wasn't on the map. There were 2 municipalities amalgamated where I grew up, the township of Nottawasaga and the township of Sunnydale. If you know Ontario geography, each township has lots and concessions, and you live on a concession road or a side road. Well, all the concessions are numbered 1 to 20 or 1 to 30. So when the 2 townships were merged, they created a new name. And of course, there are now 2 fifth lines. So somebody called in and said, there's a car on fire on the 5th line off Clearview. That's the new name. Well, the fire department went to the 5th line in Nottawasaga instead of the 5th line of Sunnydale, the other old township. And meanwhile, the car burnt to a cinder. Ed just illustrated the incredible difficulty of how do you organize addresses. BC's approach is three-part. One is to actually have a database of the addresses themselves, which they will create, and that will become the authoritative source of addresses. Some organizations that maintain them in their municipalities will replicate those to the ISIS database. Others who will take a batch upload of their addresses and upload them regularly. Others will actually go right on and add addresses. So this is a little bit what the prototype looks like. Here is one where someone would go in and add a single address. This might be a municipality with no GIS technology. And these aren't the final screens either. This was the initial prototype. So they will have the road network that they can use to check the errors on. So for instance, if you're putting an address here, right in this particular spot, or right here, this is an interesting one. What is that address? Is it on 139A Street, 110 Avenue, or Antrim Road? So it will give them the option when they put a point there. A whole subdivision going in, they can upload those in bulk. Quality control will be done back at ISIS, and bulk users will be able to extract from this on a regular basis to download their addresses. The Nova Scotia Civic Address File is an earlier implementation of a similar concept, but in this particular case, they've actually gone and connected to every building inspector in the province. Every building officer, whenever they issue a permit and they issue an address, goes on the web and updates the Nova Scotia Civic Address File, both the street if it's a subdivision and the address location. They even have gone further than this, and if they use a site plan that's been approved, they'll digitize the outline of the building, and the building will be entered into the database. So again, this is an enormous problem they have in how does an organization which had previously, been a hierarchical top-down organization that flew new photography and produced new topographic maps with buildings on them every 5 years, then it became every 10, then it became every 20 years as they didn't have money to do it, collect things like buildings. Well, this is the perfect way to do it. So this is really leads me to what is the problem that we're facing here, and this is an enormous problem. David Sonnen spoke at a luncheon at a conference in Quebec City a few months ago, and he produced this graph, which I found very, very interesting. On the left, you see a green one, which he says frequently used, often managed data. And I'm not so sure I agree with the frequency of use and the fact that it isn't managed, but in the past I do agree that's true, that if data was frequently used and was critical, it was managed. So the cadastral fabric was generally managed quite well. In fact, it's updated by transactions. And one of the big successes of the last 30 years has been taking those subdivision plans and plats and everything else, putting them together into a cadastral fabric, updating them by transactions. Alberta, the province of Alberta, updates their cadastral fabric within 24 hours of registration. Others are pushing that even further. In fact, Alberta would like to update them as soon as the municipality approves them. So then we have less frequently used data, but it's managed through informal organizational practice, such as shared network folders. Well, let's talk about addresses. Addresses fall into the frequently used and often managed, but not very well managed. But we've got other things like building footprints, which needs to be moved into the green area. And then we have the red area, which he says is 80 to 85% of the total data, infrequently used and entirely unmanaged. It's his belief, and I agree with him 100%, that the Geoweb, and he called it Geospatial Enterprise 2.0, is going to push the boundaries of management of this data way over to the right. That one of our jobs is going to be, how do we actually manage all that incredible amount of data?